Iran has slammed new U.S. sanctions, saying the measure signals a permanent closure of diplomacy between Tehran and Washington. U.S. President Donald Trump announced a host of hard-hitting sanctions yesterday, targeting top officials, including Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, the latest sanctions essentially prevents Ayatollah and his office from using the international banking system and doing business with U.S. allies in Europe and other countries. It also targets 8 Iranian military commanders, and one of whom Washington says was responsible for shooting down a U.S. spy drone last Thursday. Now, Mr. Trump's new sanctions raises the stakes in an escalating regional standoff. The latest tensions come a year after the U.S. pulled out of a nuclear accord with Iran. A war of words has ensued between the two sides. U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton says America is open to negotiations and has blamed Iran for not responding.
There's simply no evidence that Iran has made the strategic decision to renounce nuclear weapons and open realistic discussions to demonstrate that decision. The President has held the door open to real negotiations to completely and verifiably eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons program, its pursuit of ballistic missile delivery systems, its support for international terrorism, and its other malign behavior worldwide. All that Iran needs to do is to walk through that open door.
But Iran's President Hassan Rouhani insists Washington is lying about offering to negotiate. He questioned how could it call for talks while also imposing sanctions on top officials.
دچار ناتوانی ذهنی شدن اینا. کاخ سفید دچار معلولیت ذهنی شده. نمیدونه باید چیکار بکنه.
Well, for more on this, let's cross over to Mehdi Sepavan in Tehran. Mehdi, President Rouhani, he also called the new sanctions outrageous and idiotic. Does this mean that he's not taking the U.S. seriously?
Well, today when President Rouhani spoke, he was just being an Iranian leader incarnate. I mean, over the past years and decades, they have always been downplaying U.S. threats, no matter if they have been military threats or the severest economic sanctions. What the Iranian leaders do is that they say they take pride in having withstood, as they say, the U.S. pressure.
So what then will it take to get Tehran back to the negotiating table?
Well, the same Rouhani that spoke today was the one who, back in 2013, said that we should hammer things out with the chief, i.e. the U.S. And that was a very radical statement in Iran at that time. But now, seeing President Rouhani speak so about the U.S. and its policies, well, it was just expected. And I think today in Iran, even the most open politicians would be very careful about approaching the U.S. for talks.
All right, many thanks for your updates there. Mehdi Sepavan speaking to us in Tehran. And for more analysis on this, on Middle East and Central Asian politics, Professor Shahram Akbarzadeh from Deakin University joins us live from Melbourne. Tell us then, Iran says Mr. Trump's latest move has essentially blocked diplomacy between the two sides. Is the door to talks really closed?
Well, I think they are fairly closed. Never say never. But it's laughable that John Bolton says Iran is not genuine about entering into negotiation and allowing its nuclear program to be subject to international scrutiny and verifiable, moving away or giving up the nuclear weapon if they ever intended to have one. Because President Rouhani came to office with that mandate. The Iranian population voted for Rouhani. Rouhani negotiated a deal with the United States and international partners, Europeans, Russia, China, and signed a deal that made Iran subject to stringent international inspection regime. And until now, even now, after the United States has withdrawn from that deal, Iran is still compliant with that deal. That is, Iran entered negotiation and gave up its right or its any intention of pursuing a nuclear weapon. So now, sure, putting sanctions on Iran, putting sanctions on Supreme Leader, in a way is quite laughable because the Supreme Leader and many of those top officials don't have assets or financial dealings in the international arena. They don't leave Iran. They live in Iran. They are very much confined to Iran. Iran has been under sanctions for 40 years. So the notion of putting extra sanctions on the Supreme Leader is more a symbolic gesture to exert extra pressure. And this is what the Americans call maximum pressure. And I think it's really going to hurt prospects of finding some way of negotiating and talking.
Well, you mentioned there that the sanctions are laughable and, perhaps then do you think that Mr. Trump's strategy is to rely on these sanctions and tariffs to actually force other countries into making deals on his terms? And if that is the case, then how do you think this will actually impact negotiations and impact relations between the U.S. and Iran then?
Absolutely. I think Trump believes that by exerting pressure, extreme pressure, by cornering his opponents, the opponent is going to just give up, just capitulate, and then go along with any term that Trump is offering. But I think that's a big mistake. I think what's happened in the past 40 years, more than 40 years of the Islamic Republic, the Iranian regime is actually set up on this idea of standing up to the international bully, to the United States as the big bully of the world. So what Trump is doing is really playing to that script of putting more pressure, acting more aggressively, and really not doing anything to offer, an olive leaf to open up negotiations.
Well, given that it was the U.S. that and Donald Trump's administration that withdrew from the nuclear deal that was already in place, it certainly seems like the U.S. is the aggressor when it comes to this relationship between the U.S. and Iran. That must be how it's being perceived and seen in Iran as well.
That's exactly how it is seen in Iran, and that's the irony of the situation is that President Rouhani and the pragmatists who are in administration have been trying very hard to keep the nuclear deal alive. They have been talking to Europeans or talking to China, Russia, to keep the nuclear deal alive and to gain some level of assurances from the Europeans especially that Europe will continue to deal with Iran economically and abide by their obligations under the nuclear treaty. The problem is that Europeans are put in a really hard situation under President Trump's secondary sanctions, which means that if European companies deal with Iran, then all their operations in the U.S. are going to be jeopardized and put at risk. So, which means that European companies don't really want to lose business in the U.S. As a result, they are not following through under the terms of the nuclear deal with Iran. So, the President Rouhani entered this deal against the advice of his critics. There are many in Iran, hardliners, who said you cannot trust the U.S., you cannot enter into any agreement with the U.S. Because they are not trustworthy. President Rouhani said, let us try and achieve some level of compromise with the U.S. and the international community. Now he is paying the price. Now he is being really attacked by all sorts of hardliners for really making Iran look weak in the international community. And that he has really become a sitting duck as a president.
All right, we'll have to see how this one plays out. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this evening. Professor Shahram Akbarzadeh from Deakin University in Melbourne.